the name of the conference is Public Cloud, the good, the risks, and the audit. So we'll be in 3 sections. The good will be addressed by Matt Sozman from Microsoft. He'll cover why we're losing the cybersecurity battle, the cyber battle, and how embracing the cloud will help address that. The risks will be a combined panel of CSA and ISACA. We're going to look at the paper put out by CSA, the top threats to cloud computing, the egregious 11. And we'll finish up on the 3rd session with audit with Lauren Schwartz, who is with Cotton & Company, a partner, and we'll be covering auditing the cloud. So now we're going to move on to our 2nd session. So our 2nd session is really a panel, and we're going to be going through and discussing these 11 different topics. So let me first introduce the panel. Again, my name's Scott Fashel. I'm with Soder Cloud Solutions. I have a financial and cybersecurity background. I work with mid-sized companies to help them move to the cloud. Dr. Mari Spina is a principal cybersecurity engineer with MITRE. Mari's main body of work has been in the intelligence community and DoD, including teaching cybersecurity. And she's also the research committee chair for CSA DC. Bob Gourley is co-founder and CTO of OODA. Bob has a deep background in intelligence community. And interesting, he was named as one of the 25 most influential CTOs in the globe by InfoWorld. Our 3rd panelist is Sushila Nair. She's Vice President of Security Portfolio with NTT Data. She's worked in the space for 20 years, including a CISO for 10 years. She is well-published and an accomplished speaker at global technical events. So I want to welcome you all, and Bob and Mari are with CSA, and Sushila is with ISACA, so it gives you a broad brush for the 2 different associations.
Yep, and we've got the great, the questions have come up as well, the polling about which security issues in the cloud are our audience most concerned about.
So folks, please take 20 seconds, multiple choice, pick your top 3 that you're most concerned with. All right, great, let's see what the results are. So data breaches, number 1. I'd say insider threat, number 2, and then lack of cloud security architecture and strategies, number 3. So Sushila, do you want to start off with data breaches, which is number 1?
Sure, yes. So I think this area of data breaches, there's a 2-fold level of concern. And one of the concerns I think has really kind of gone down over time, which is concerns around, well, what happens if the cloud service provider was to have a breach and, am I data to be exposed in some fashion? Equally, if I use a SaaS application, is there a potential possibility that the SaaS provider hasn't taken the right precautions in place so that a breach could occur? Now, I think dealing first with the question about concerns around cloud service providers, certainly we know that with the very large public cloud service providers like Microsoft, Google, and AWS, they have some really amazing security controls in place. I remember Google presenting to me, talking about how a nation state attack attempted to take out some of their fiber optic cable and their controls that they had in place to prevent that. So, when you're making a choice around what cloud service providers you're going to use, really understanding what they have in place to ensure that they are protected is really, a good idea. And we see, in fact, that happening. Many end users really heading towards some of the largest cloud service providers because of the fact that they have the capability to have built up this incredibly resilient architectures, and also very clearly come out and advertised, their capability to be able to be audited and meet the regulatory requirements that are out there. And we see government, in fact, leaning to use these cloud service providers because of the increased trust. So that I think is very, very interesting. And then secondly, I think concerns around, around with your data, if you're storing it in the cloud, what controls can you put in place? And that area, we need to just be very clear that ultimately the data belongs to us. It is our responsibility. And when we make a choice to store it in the cloud, we're still responsible for ensuring we're making good choices. And depending on what our shared responsibility lies, we need to have those right security controls in place. But independent of whether I'm using SaaS or IaaS or PaaS, right? Ultimately, it's my data, and I need to make good choices about where it's placed and how I'm securing it. Does that make sense, Scott?
Yes, it does. Bob, Mari, would you care to comment?
Yes, I would like to comment. So I continue to see in this area what I would consider a poor use of encryption. I still strongly believe that good encryption schemas and systems can be very effective here, but I do know that they're complicated and they're expensive and they add performance issues. But what I see continuously is that folks just want to ignore it, right? Well, it's too complicated, it's too expensive, let's not do it. So I would emphasize, Sushila talked about the controls that you put in the cloud, to consider client side or consumer side encryption, even going beyond the transparent encryption that, for example, the cloud provider might give you. Because if you compromise the API on a cloud service, even though it's encrypting, it's always going to render unencrypted. So keep that in mind. That would be my recommendation in that area.
Bob, your thoughts?
I do have a comment, and one, keep in mind that this egregious 11 is built by a working group that surveyed about 250 cloud security executives and experts to come up with the top issues, and data breaches was absolutely number one because it's on the top of everybody's mind. And one thing I hear from folks frequently is, we'll see a list of who got breached and how much information was compromised. I imagine everybody listening here has been wrapped up in one of these breaches at some time or another. Many of us have been hit by multiple breaches, either through your health insurance provider or the Office of Management and Budget, who does security clearances, or other government or e-commerce companies. So we've all been wrapped up, and some of us are actually getting numb to the fact. Here's another day, another breach, and it just seems numbing and overwhelming. And I wanted to say we need to resist that and understand that we can take action to mitigate these breaches. Most of the other topics in this list, the egregious 11, if they're put in place, will really help mitigate and reduce the risk of data breaches. So that was my comment.
Yeah, a lot of these security issues kind of intertwine, don't they? And so as we go through, there'll really be the solution to one might be a solution to the other one as well. Bob, why don't you take the second one, which is insider threat? Let's go right into that.
Okay. Insider threat's another term that has actually been evolving over time. It used to be, when we'd say insider threat, that's the person who has authorized access to your systems. It's an employee that has an employee badge, has an employee login, might be a good person for their entire career, and all of a sudden something happens. At night, something changes. They come in the next morning and they have malicious intent. That's a very serious threat. And that is still the insider threat. What's been changing is that insider might not be your employee. That insider threat may actually work for your cloud computing provider, or work for a supply chain partner, or someone else who has access to your systems. So it's getting more complicated, because now the person with authorized access to your systems may not be completely under your control. So very serious. And
yeah, we're going to get into access control even more in one of our topics, but it ties into what Matt was talking about earlier, doesn't it?
it does. It really does.
Sheila would like to comment on insider threat.
right? You know what? It's so funny. I keep focusing on misconfiguration and inadequate change control. That's my favorite.
We'll
But
get there.
I'll talk about insider threat. I mean, certainly, I think with insider threat, and we've had, one of the recent largest breaches that I can think of was in fact, in part, an insider threat. And it was very, very interesting because, one of the things I will say is it's difficult. In fact, let's face it, it's impossible to have perfect security, right? And some of the people that you need to trust the most, your administrators, are the people with the most access. And so it is absolutely critical that you start to look at things like, just-in-time administrative access, really ensuring that you're using good identity governance. Now, you're going to hear time and time again when people talk about cloud, that identity is the new perimeter, right? And if you get it wrong, then insider threat as well it becomes more and more critical, right? So I think it's really, really important to have separation of duties, just-in-time access around administrators, monitoring around what they're doing, because otherwise, over time, as we know, people kind of build up permissions and capabilities. So I would rate insider threat as something that you need to have good controls around, and what those controls look like is ensuring that you have good identity governance, that you have good separation of duties, and you also have great monitoring in place, and really, really look at how you're having privileged access management. There's a lot of cloud-based privileged access management, which reduces some of that risk of insider threat.
Maury, before we get to our next topic, any comments on insider threat?
Yes, absolutely. So insider threat, I believe, in terms of the controls you use, pick up where ICAM, right, identity and access management, fails. And so when identity is the new perimeter, I think that's a problem. Because today we have identity-based access control. We authenticate and then we get access. The problem with that entire system is the fact that credentials can be stolen, they can be captured and replayed, tokens live far too long than they should. And so when we talk about insider threat, the only real controls that work right are behavior-based. And so when access control becomes risk-based, right? And so we're looking at, is this person really acting like we think they should? Then we're actually able to better understand, has somebody's credential been stolen? Is somebody going rogue, right? They may be upset about something that happened in the workplace and then just be doing, bad things. Some of the best insider threat programs today look at social media, right? And they look at social media feeds to see what are people posting. And so it gets, it very quickly gets into privacy issues, and we have to be careful. The CSA DC chapter recently wrote a paper on trust in the 21st century, which has to do with individual and corporate identity trust scoring. So I think we need to look in this area for insider threat controls. We need to look to zero trust kinds of solutions, conditional-based access, context-based access, which is all about where are people coming from, what time of day is it, did they log in from Chicago and now they're in China, these kinds of things, and that can all be done. Now the big area here, right, is the risk analytic, and can we get the feeds and use the feeds, the data feeds, to come up with things like risk scores, to make risk-based decisions. That still remains to be seen. Even the best software-defined perimeter solutions don't really calculate a risk-based analytic per se. But the best we have now would be some of the zero trust vendors, which they're a little bit shy on risk-based scoring. And then Microsoft does a real good thing with conditional-based access in O365. So I would look to those areas and watch that, because insider threat is going to help us understand when a credential is stolen and when the user goes rogue. And those are the big deficiencies in our current approach.
Well, Matt in the first session talked about how I love the phrase access control is a new firewall.
Yeah.
And it's so true.
Mhm.
It's the one thing that you can control that I think is going to do the job. In fact, that's our fourth topic is insufficient identity access management. Mari, would you like to talk about that a little bit more and go deeper into the topic?
Yeah, so, just about every single attack I study has something to do with some poor management of either identity or access control. Like I said, tokens live too long. There was a recent case on a proxy firewall solution where they couldn't work with a certain third-party provider. So the firewall vendor said, well, just turn off credential validation, right? And so, that's sort of the, cryptographic approach to making sure that, you're talking to the right person or entity. And you just can't shut that kind of thing off, even if it means to make a system work. Sushila mentioned the governance. And so there's a new concept coming out in government about continuous vetting, right? People may go through background checks, but these background checks may actually sort of be intensified, recycled, redone, reconsidered, and other parameters may be called into play, right? In some, when you work for some government agencies, you're asked to sign a release so that they can monitor your spending habits and stuff like that. So, look for those kinds of things, but there's no, there's no quick remedy for poor governance around, managing credentials, issuing credentials, revoking those credentials, right, in a timely way.
Keeping them up to date.
Yeah, I mean, you can't believe how many systems I've been asked to assess, and they've been operating for years, and they still have old accounts of people who are gone, right? And so that can't persist, and that's a governance issue. So anyway, those would be the kinds of things that I would look for.
Bob, your thoughts on access management?
Yes, my thoughts are this too has been changing over time. Just a few years ago, you did access management by controlling your own directory, and you add somebody and take somebody out, and it's a very enterprise-centric thing. But now that the boundaries have changed to the enterprise, identity is being federated, and it's much smarter, and I think very helpful to enterprise missions. Using technologies like SAML, for example, we can share identity. And then some great best-of-breed companies have come up to help provide identity management all the way from desktops to devices to the enterprise and the cloud. Companies like Okta, for example, and there's several that do that. And the big enterprise providers like Microsoft and Amazon have identity solutions. So it's really robust solutions available, which raises the question, how do you know the right thing to do? How do you know the best practices in configuring all this stuff to optimize identity? And with that as a lead-in, I want to mention something that the Cloud Security Alliance provides in this domain. Cloud Security Alliance provides a lot of neat research and guidance and products and frameworks. My personal favorite is the Cloud Security Alliance Cloud Controls Matrix, the CCM. This provides best practices and security principles on 13 different domains. You look these domains up and you see, here's what I need to consider to be more secure in the cloud. One of these is identity. So you look in the CSA CCM, the Cloud Controls Matrix, go to the identity section, and it's going to help you understand what you need to do to have a good, strong identity program and what controls to put in place. One other thing on that, and this applies not just to identity, but all of these issues we're talking about today. The Cloud Security Alliance works collaboratively with every other organization that they can find in this domain, including ISACA. ISACA, when I think of ISACA, I think COBIT. The ISACA COBIT is so very important. And in the cloud domain, the work that the Cloud Security Alliance is doing maps completely to COBIT. And you can download a spreadsheet that says, here's the Cloud Security Alliance Cloud Controls Matrix. and how it maps to all these different security domains and standards and regulations and controls and frameworks like ISACA COBIT. And but this applies not just to identity management. This applies to all of these egregious 11.
Well, just on that topic, I think it's excellent that CSA and ISACA are joining forces, because they're really complementary groups that both have something to offer, and again, just brings our community up to a higher standard. Sheila, how about multi-factor authentication?
Oh, yep. Good. That's where I was going.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe just for initially kind of joining on to that conversation about, about some of the challenges around identity. I think up to now, when you have a look, many organizations really didn't have one single source of identity, especially if you were very large, right? And there were lots of mergers and acquisitions and changes. And so there could have been, even though there was this dream of this single Active Directory, right? There might have been multiple different identity sources. And then as people moved to the cloud, if you hadn't really sorted out how you were managing identity well, you actually kind of compounded the problem by moving to the cloud. So as one of the questions I thought that was interesting that came out when Matt was talking was, how do if I'm already there, where do I start, right? So really understanding that one of the things that you really have to get sorted right from the onset is identity. So, that's where you really start. And the way that I like to break it up is identity governance, right? Identity as a service, and then privileged access management. And really looking through those three to ensure that you are moving towards at least that single, identity. And then strengthening those credentials, because we understand that, there's some super powerful users, especially in the cloud, that could do enormous amounts of damage should that identity ever be compromised, right? So using multi-factor authentication is really, really helpful. And we recognize as well, credential theft, if that is what you're using as passwords, and is really a high risk. And one of the things actually I like within Microsoft is they actually monitor for credential theft and actually apply risk to accounts that have been, known from their threat intelligence to be compromised. So recommendation here is, especially in this new world, this new normal that we're in, that everybody moves towards multi-factor authentication now for all accounts, as well as especially, privileged accounts. And ensuring, when you're using multi-factor authentication, that you're thinking about ease of use as well. One of the things that one organization I was working with were talking about is, they introduced MFA. The MFA was complex to use. Most of their users simply bypassed and went back to entering passwords. So think about it as you go and as you introduce multi-factor authentication, how to do it simply, smoothly, and it is one of the best things you can do to be able to increase your security. And certainly for all of your root accounts, one of the things that you need to ensure is that you have really, really good security around it. And that also you're managing your keys well, right? So any encryption keys that you have, that they're rotating them, that you're managing them, that you're monitoring them. So a really, really critical and very important to understand as well, that identity is not a project. It's not something that I'm going to start today, get right in 4 months, and boom, I'm done. It really is a program. You need somebody responsible for identity in your organization, and it's ongoing improvement with real metrics so that you understand that you're getting where you need to do, which is to get towards this adaptive workforce model, right? A single identity with really good governance around your entire identity lifecycle, from onboarding to offboarding.
Let me add a couple of things too. Sorry to go back, but everybody's discussion kind of brings it back up. So the other, I think, two things to consider here. One is the least privilege, right? We've talked about least privilege in the past. It's been a long time concept, right? But we're still not really getting it right. Right, so you think about today's VPN solutions, you VPN into the organization, and most users have free reign over the network. in a true least privilege construct, and that's sort of what's being pushed by the zero trust vendors at the moment. Every access decision is based on some set of attributes, you know, that get finer and finer grained as you get closer and closer to the data. You know, if we can do that right, we're really gonna win. And then the other thing is to look at, Bob mentioned Okta. Oh my goodness, Okta, I don't usually boast about vendors, but Okta really provides, and there are other third-party identity providers that do similar things to help you with MFA, right? And so the ability to throw a one-time password, or to use a fingerprint, or to look at the device that you're on, to use a device credential, to even look at the device in terms of what cell phone provider is managing the device, things like that. The capabilities coming out now are very robust and definitely worth consideration. So I'd recommend looking there as well.
Well, thank you. Let's pivot. And our next three topics in order would be the security architecture, misconfiguration, and then we'll go look at APIs. So Sushila, you want to lead us off with cloud security architecture?
Yes. You know, as you move, you know, towards the cloud, and you're thinking about what business goals you want to achieve, because really that's why you're moving to the cloud, isn't it? You've got some particular business goals that you want to achieve. And as you look at what you can do, you really need to have an architecture and a strategy in place. And let me give you some clear examples, right? Are you going to lead, for instance, with software as a service? Is that, in fact, it's the primary use of cloud today, right? And part of that, I believe, is because it reduces some of the day-to-day management onto the provider. And so we really see a great uptake around software as a service, right? So really determining how are you going to use infrastructure as a service? You know, lift and shift is generally not a good idea. So in other words, I'm going to pick my on-prem structure up, right, and just move it to the cloud. And I've seen it done sometimes because maybe you have a very tight timeline, you've decided to get rid of your data center, and you kind of need to move really, really quickly. But the reality is, you know, coming up with an idea of how are you going to leverage the cloud in order to meet your business objectives. So are you going to use software as a service? Are you going to use PaaS? Are you going to use IaaS? And if you're going to use PaaS and you're developing your own applications, how are you going to develop those applications to really use, right, the strength of the cloud, the resilience, you know, really derive the benefits of this wonderful kind of infrastructure? So without a good cloud security architecture and strategy, what you end up with is a piecemeal approach to the way that you're managing each part of your technology that's supposed to be aligned to your business goals. So it's very, very important to have a clear cloud security architecture and strategy. And I would recommend, I remember seeing a response from one in the audience saying, hey, you know, are you concerned about cloud lock-in? You know, I think that it's really important when you come up with your cloud security architecture and strategy that you're designing how those security controls will look and also how they would function in a where you're using multiple different cloud CSPs as well as on-prem infrastructure. So very much all projects should start with a cloud security architecture and strategy that's agreed by the business, it's aligned with your business goals. And if you don't have one, then I think definitely start putting one together today so that the whole business is aligned on how you're using cloud and how you're going to secure it.
Bob, your thoughts?
No, it's hard to build on that. That's just such, you know, perfectly well put. So all I could do is state the obvious, that it's all about both a vision, and then an architecture is that design that makes vision a reality. Maybe I would just add that as you're embarking on this, there's a lot of people have done this before, and the Cloud Security Alliance, they collect the lessons learned and best practices on this that can kickstart anybody on this path towards a good, strong cloud security architecture and strategy.
Bob, we'll come back to misconfiguration, but Mari, do you want to just give some thoughts on the architecture topic?
Yeah, my sense is that the API tend to get insecure when sort of credential management is not being done well. So it's kind of another tie-in. And so the notion of privileged access management solutions, or PAM, I think are very, very important here. You know, when it comes to your cloud service provisioning interfaces where, you know, things can go awry very quickly, those you need to make sure you've got a good credential management system, and you know who's accessing and you know what they're doing in the cloud, right? So for example, Amazon's CloudTrails, you want to alert when things happen, like, you know, virtual machines spin up that, you know, shouldn't be, that kind of thing. So that would be my recommendation in that area.
Thanks for that. Bob, why don't you take us into misconfiguration and inadequate change control?
Okay, we'll do. One, I want to say a reminder, the Egregious 11 is part of a work group effort at the Cloud Security Alliance. And this work group continually meets and publishes things. And the Egregious 11 might change over time. Maybe one year it's going to be 13, the next year it might be 10, but they continue to do this work. And along with this work, they produce not just this list of the Egregious 11, but the many controls that can be used to help mitigate them. And they also produced a deep dive into many of the major breaches so they could do a cause analysis on what caused these. And the majority of them, as you might imagine, have some kind of attack vector that starts with a phishing attack. But almost every single one of them also had misconfiguration as one of the root causes. It's always there in some way, either the root cause or a root cause, or a way that the adversary pivoted somewhere else. And misconfiguration is generally defined as an error in how things are configured. And that's true, but maybe it's a little bit harsh. Things have gotten so complex, it's almost impossible to know how your stuff is configured. This is where audit and checking and controls comes in. You really have to do that well to catch the major misconfigurations. And then also my line of work, red teaming, you need people who can come in and act as if they're the adversary and see if you have things configured so well that a dedicated adversary could not get in. And by working with a red teaming company, you can then learn how to rapidly configure to keep those adversaries from getting in. Now, I also mentioned the Cloud Security Alliance has a lot of information, including the Cloud Controls Matrix. If you follow the Cloud Controls Matrix, it's designed to make you think about every possible misconfiguration and what controls can be put in place to make sure you're thinking through that. Now, nothing's perfect. We know some adversary will find a way to get in, but this is a good way to mitigate risk. And it maps to COBIT, of course.
Before other comments, Bob, when has that paper been publicly released, the deep dive?
I don't know if it's publicly released yet. I was just on the website today and I didn't see it in their main feed. So I think it's coming out really, really soon.
Right,
and
right.
When it does, of course, it'll be well worth a read.
Definitely, definitely. Now, for people who want to access that paper in Egregious 11, what's a good search topic or the URL to access?
You know, if you just go to the Cloud Security Alliance website, sign up with your email address. It's the lowest risk, highest payoff thing you'll ever do in the security domain. And they will keep you in the loop on when these things are released. And of course, we really, really, really want you to align yourself with the Northern Virginia, Maryland, DC chapter of the Cloud Security Alliance. We'll keep you in the loop too. And you can do that easily by connecting to us on LinkedIn or going to our website and giving us your email address. And we will respect that, of course. So we'll keep you in the loop as these things come out, and and we'll keep you in the loop on our meetings, or when Mari runs a research initiative and she publishes something, we'll keep you in the loop on that.
And you work through Meetup. I know I access the group through Meetup, so that's another avenue.
Thanks for mentioning that, because that probably is just the best, easiest way for everybody to stay in the loop, is finding us on Meetup.
Great. So Sheila, I know misconfiguration is one of your favorite topics, so have at it.
Yes, and virtually every single cloud breach that has occurred has contained some element of misconfiguration. And, you know, I have enormous amounts of compassion because I know that it is really difficult. We've spent years and years and years learning how to secure on-prem capabilities, right? And then it all moved to the cloud, and it's different. And a lot of people want to secure the cloud in the same way that they secure on-prem capabilities. And that's really not a good idea, right? It's a different, animal, really. So we have to kind of reskill to be able to really understand how we leverage the controls within the cloud. And so that's difficult. That kind of change, first of all, is we've got to make sure that our people have the knowledge in place to understand how to configure, the cloud service provider environment correctly. So wonderful resources, certainly from the Cloud Security Alliance. And also, I want to point to the fact that almost all of these cloud service providers have free training that is off their websites, right? So what I recommend is that, you know, to start with a program internally to really skill your people up. And much of that training capability is available there. And it's an argument, right, towards first starting with one cloud service provider so you understand, are able to configure that well, instead of kind of going in 2 or 3 directions all at the same time, right? So, and then the other thing that I would really kind of pay attention to is, as you've, built up your security architecture and strategy, you're training your people, you're making sure that you've got those SMEs so that, they know how to configure things correctly, that you're also updating your processes so that all of that exists, and know as well that the cloud service providers actually have done a really good job, and that many of them have this idea of a cloud workload protection platform. So what you can go and do, for instance, using Google's Command Center, or on AWS, you've got Security Center, you can go in and it will actually run a report to say, hey, here's some misconfiguration. So literally, they provide a console to help you understand, do you have some misconfiguration in place? And it's incredible how many people don't run that to just check if they have those issues in policy. It will actually even monitor, it will even run reports against your security framework. So you can go in and configure policies, and it'll try and measure where you're there. But automation to ensure that you are not misconfigured, right? The number of times there are, S3 storage buckets just shared with no permissions, because then one of the other panelists mentioned, it worked, so they shared it that way, is really kind of deeply concerning. So it's a multiple level that we really need to focus on. Is firstly, make sure we've got that architecture and strategy, but that we're also training our people, that we're updating our processes, that we recognize that the paradigm has changed, so we're going to use different controls, and really get to understand the tools that will help us both from an audit, risk management perspective, as well as the security perspective. And I actually have a table where, all of these tools that are key, and I will say that there are a couple of tools here that are key. I'm not into throwing technology, we've got enough technology in consoles, right? But I would recommend that definitely in this new world, you consider having some kind of cloud workload protection platform to enable you to, at a glance, understand, if you have some misconfiguration. It's not going to cover everything, but it's going to help you. And then look at those gaps and make sure that you have automation in place in order to be able to detect when controls have been altered. So that's my 2 cents. Subject I feel strongly about.
So Scott, let me add a couple of things just real quick to that one.
Please.
So Sheila mentioned automation, right? And I think automation is very powerful here. And this is where DevSecOps is really shining at the moment and really making headway. And so if you want to know what are good benchmarks for a secure cloud configuration, take a look at the Centers for Internet Security, CIS. They've got some benchmarks for that. Those benchmarks, along with a number of DoD STIGs, have been implemented in a open community MITRE provided software automation framework. And it uses a thing called a tool called Inspec to come up with checks and validations. And then a thing called Heimdall data format to actually visualize the results of your compliance. So think about those kind of things. But then the notion of misconfiguration really bears on the topic of, are the cloud service providers giving us what we need so that we don't inadvertently, right, or by default misconfigure things or leave things misconfigured or insecure, so to speak, not secure. And so, you know, the cloud providers are getting a little bit better at taking some responsibility. The Capital One breach, we saw both Google and Amazon come out with fixes for their metadata capability, their metadata storage capability, which is used to store credential information, you know, that machines can, virtual machines can use to boot up with, kind of thing. But we probably need to see some more of that because, you know, the big one here is the S3, Open S3 bucket, right? Everybody knows that, and it's very simple to understand. So look for changes there, and we might want to push our cloud service providers a little bit to make it easier, to give us more default security. But then this notion of inadequate change control, right? So the third topic I wanted to bring up is the other term you need to look for is shadow IT, right? And so it's being kind of obscured by this notion of shadow IT. What is shadow IT? Well, it's anytime something spins up in your environment or is provisioned that you really didn't want or authorize, right? And it can either be an attacker or it can be an authorized user who's just doing something that may not meet all the normal standards and processes. So you really want to look at that. So solutions for detecting shadow IT are really good here. So keep those three things in mind.
Great. Well, we're pressed.
May I just add to that, just to mention one of the controls around shadow IT, because I think that's such a good point and a real
Yes.
problem that I hear voiced time and time again, is also looking at things like cloud access security brokers, CASB, can be helpful to reduce some of the risk of shadow IT, because I think that's a huge problem. I just wanted to add that in there.
Right. We're pressing up against time at the moment. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to see, Jose, can you make sure Nicole is unmuted?
We can talk forever, Scott.
I know.
I'm unmuted. Hi.
Hi. So what we want to do is to go into Q&A for a good, say, 5 minutes. Is there anything on the chat that's jumping out?
There was one question. They said today their hospital has informed them of a data breach, and it was attributed to the third-party provider that informed them months ago about a breach. There's always data breaches. I think that the root has not been addressed. Managers with insufficient IT knowledge perpetuate the problem. What do you think?
Panel?
I think there's certainly some truth to be said when we look time and time again at the most common causes of security breaches, that it invariably occurs that security hygiene is an issue, right? If we could just do the basics, that it would be really important. And to give people space, right? Complex environments, it's difficult to even do all the basics. You know, we'd all patch everything if it was just straightforward. However, we need to get on top of that. And so there is certainly, you know, all breaches are, you know, complex and often have different root causes, but just at a very simplistic level, raising your security hygiene certainly removes you as being low-hanging fruit.
You know, I would just like to comment that, man, I feel for the person who did this, because you can feel powerless. Your data is in the hands of somebody else. And also, when I think of a hospital, you want hospital leadership, at least I do, to be thinking about your health and healthcare and delivering valuable healthcare to you and your family. And now they have to be security professionals too. And you multiply that by every mission in the entire world. If you're in the Air Force, you want those guys learning how to fly jets, not learning to be security professionals, and on and on and on and on. So it's really a struggle. Now we take all these people and we add on top of that, that you have to lead a hospital and you also have to maintain security over everything. Unfortunately, it's just a new fact of life. We all have to be deeper involved in security, but we need teams of people that we can trust, that we can apply to these problems. Every
Exactly.
hospital needs a professional who can wrap their head around security and configuration management and control and protection of data, and be a top advisor to the person who's in charge of the key mission of that hospital. And same statement is true for every other mission you can think of in the economy.
Mari?
One last thing on that. If you've been breached, if you're part of the breach, go take a look at LifeLock, right? So identity protection services, look into those right away.
Great. Nicole, are we able to post that same question again on the Regis 11 poll?
Sure.
So audience, we're just asking you to take the same poll again and see if the discussion reminded you of some issues that you're concerned with, and if it changes your opinion. So please select the top 3 security issues that you're concerned with.
I gotta admit,
Also, while we're looking at that poll, there was a question here. Is there data that you believe that should not be stored in the cloud?
Mari?
Yeah, right. So if you look at some of the government guidance and NIST guidance on how to categorize data, right? You very quickly get to this notion of control baselines, right? And although with the new 853 version 5, I think they're going to do away with baselines as we know it and use profiles. But in any event, it'll be a set of controls that will comply with concepts in low, moderate, and high security, right? So if your data categorizes as requiring high-level controls, you would like to have high-level control solutions being implemented by your cloud service provider. So in general, right, you wouldn't want to put a high-level, high sensitivity data set in a low or moderately controlled cloud. So that would be my answer on that. On the other hand, that's sort of general guidance. On the other hand, everything is a risk decision. And again, if you can put sufficient controls around things, you know, it may be perfectly okay, right? Super duper strong encryption and systems that don't, you know, reveal the data until the absolute correct person is accessing it may be completely sufficient. So I'll leave you with that sort of 2 ends of the answer.
Well, Bob, I'm sure the intelligence community has addressed that. But any 30-second comment from Bob and then Sushila before we wrap up?
You know, I do have a comment. And first of all, what Mari said was just spot on about data in the cloud. My comment is I wanted to quote another MITRE employee, a former MITRE employee, Claude Shannon. Is that a familiar name to everybody? In many ways, Claude Shannon is thought of as the father of the digital age. He was an MIT professor, did work at MITRE for a while. And one of the things that struck me about his writing as he was writing about these new systems that the world was going to be building is we have to assume the adversary knows the system, always. And I believe that's relevant to cloud security today. Assume the adversary knows the system. With that in mind, how do you protect your data in your cloud implementation?
Sushila, to wrap
And I
up?
guess what I would say is that certainly, you know, you need to take as Mari said, a risk-based decision around your data, and also understand when you put your data in the cloud, you know, where that cloud service provider is storing that data, and, you know, are you setting it up to be a highly available, resilient? So that really, and there are different levels of security provided by different cloud service providers. So understanding your provider and understanding what they're, you know, providing in terms of security is very, very important. And I will say that, you know, as a result of the pandemic, we all know cloud is here to stay, right? We all know that that has happened. And then really the critical thing that we do today as we skill ourselves up, really, you know, as I mentioned, each one of those cloud service providers have capability out there, and ISAC has actually partnered with Cloud Security Alliance to actually create a certification around this, because we all need to understand, you know, cloud security, and more information is going to be stored in the cloud, including your data. And so really ensuring you understand what security controls are there is going to be critical for all of us.
Well, we got poll results. Looks like misconfiguration got a little bit more attention this time. But again, data breaches, which Bob referred to in the beginning, is always seems to be the #1 concern, insider threat, and then misconfiguration. Well, we're out of time. I want to thank the panel so much for your excellent contributions. We will give you a small token of appreciation with a little gift card. And again, thank you. And this is the end of session #2.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.